It should be fine, right? Yeah, that should be fine. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. Amma ba'd. Tonight, inshallah, I'm going to talk about the history of Ottoman Empire briefly. I will not be able to talk about this great empire of Islamic history in detail because it spans over a period of more than 6 centuries. This empire lasted for more than 600 years. So, last week, alhamdulillah, I had a chance to visit Turkey. And Turkey is the modern country which was established after the collapse of Ottoman Empire during World War I. So at the end of World War I, the Ottomans were defeated as part of their alliance with the defeated country. So when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, the Khalifa, he fled to Syria and he lived there and he died there as well. And there was nothing left of Ottoman Empire. And Mustafa Kemal, who is considered to be the founder of this modern Turkey, he was an army person. And he ran a campaign of freedom from the occupying forces. And he was successful in freeing the country. He liberated the modern Turkey from the occupying forces who had basically divided all of the Ottoman Empire. When Ottoman Empire was well and alive, its governance included so many territories that are different countries today, including all of Middle East. Not just the Arabian Peninsula, but all of the Middle East, including today's Syria, Jordan, Iran, and Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Qatar, Yemen, Palestine, Israel. All of these territories, they were part of this Ottoman Empire. And not only the whole of Middle East, including Egypt, was part of Ottoman Empire, but also in Africa, there were many countries that were part of the Ottoman Empire. And Turkey is that country which is basically situated in 2 continents in the world. And it is the only country that is divided in 2 continents. So, some part of Turkey is in Europe, and most of the Turkey is in Asia. So it is called Eurasia. And the only city that makes this happen, that makes this possible for Turkey to be considered Eurasian country, is Istanbul. So half of Istanbul, or maybe most of Istanbul, is in Europe, and all the old historic parts of Istanbul are in Europe, European part of Turkey, and some of Istanbul is in Asian part of in Asian part of Turkey. So Istanbul is divided in 2 continents. One part is in Asia, and another part is in Europe. So I stayed mostly in the European part of Istanbul because this is where all the historic places were, which I wanted to visit. And as I mentioned, Istanbul used to be the power seat of Ottoman Empire. But before it became the power seat of Ottoman Empire, it used to be the power seat of the Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire. And the Byzantine Empire, basically, in that time, this city was called Constantinople. In Arabic, the name is Qustantiniya, and this name Qustantiniya is mentioned in many ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some of which I will mention later. So Qustantiniya or Constantinople, basically the name was given to this city after the first king or after the founder of this place, whose name was Constantine the Great. And this city was basically founded in 330. So a few hundred years before the birth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and a few hundred years after Sayyidina Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. So Constantine the Great, basically he conquered this city, and this part of the country was not only alive during his time, but it had been one of the ancient cities in the world. Just like in Greece there was Athens, and in Egypt there was Cairo, and in Palestine there was Jerusalem. Just like that, Constantinople was one of the historic cities, was one of the historic places in the world even during that time. So by conquering Constantinople, he became the first ruler, he became the first king of the city, and he established this place. At that time, he also brought with him the church. Until that time, there was no proper church, and there was no proper system in the church. This Vatican Church was established after 400 years of Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. So this country was founded before that. So the church was also brought to this, and this church was considered the Church of Constantine or the Church of Constantinople. And it was also the central place for Christianity. So for Christians, this had not only the place of governance, but also the place of center that served as the unifying pole, that served as the unifying center for all of them. So I will come back to the Ottomans. Now, this place had been the center for Christianity for 1100 years. For 1100 years, all the Christians, they gave so much importance to this part of the world that they considered this a sort of rival of the Roman Church. So in West, they had the Roman Church, the Roman Catholic Church, and in East, they had this Constantinople Church, Qustantiniya Church, Byzantine. So they used to have this rivalry among themselves as well. So 1100 years later, when the Ottomans, they founded their own empire, they slowly started expanding their empire. So first, they started from the Middle East, then they started adding territories into their empire, and each emperor, who was called Sultan, he used to make effort trying to conquer Qustantiniya. Now, this city was not only tried by these sultans, by these leaders of Muslims of Ottoman Empire, but attempts were made to conquer this city even by some companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The first group that came to attack this place among the Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'een was under the supervision and under the instruction of Sayyidina Muawiyah's son Yazid. So Yazid basically was assigned this job by Muawiyah radiallahu anh to take a group of soldiers, and among those soldiers there were many companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and most notably Sayyidina Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiallahu anh. So they all left from Medina and they came all the way to Constantinople. And conquering this place was close to impossible, because it is surrounded by seas or water from three sides. So on one side there is a sea of Marmara, and on another side there is Bosphorus, and on another side, on third side, there is the Golden Horn. If you have the map, which I can show you here, I'll give you a close-up how the geography of Istanbul is made up. So there's water on three sides, and that makes it very difficult for any country or any army to make attempt to conquer this country or this city. So this is Istanbul. Now this part is basically the old part of Istanbul, and it is the European side. Now you can see the cursor. This part of the Istanbul basically is the historic part, and on this side this is called the Golden Horn. Okay, so this is the Golden Horn, this is Bosphorus, and on this side this is the Sea of Marmara. So there's water on three sides. So you can't go from here, you can't go from here, and you can't go from here unless you have boats or you have good sailors. So they were protected on three sides. On one side, from here, there was the link, so you could enter from here. So on this side, there was heavy army guarding this border. So they were safe from three sides, and one side they had good soldiers, good army protecting the country or protecting Istanbul. So many emperors, many sultans, and before them many other conquerors, they tried to conquer this historic place, but they failed. Every attempt was made, but every attempt turned out to be a loss. They could not do it. Even the Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'een, they came over here. They tried everything in their power to conquer this city, but they could not. They stayed there for months. They even built houses in which they used to live, in trying to make every effort to conquer the city, but they could not. Finally, Sayyidina Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anhu, he died there. And I will talk about it in a few minutes, inshallah. He died there and he was buried there as well. Because he had made a wasiyah, he had made a request that when he has died, he should be buried as close to the city, as close to the walls of the city as possible. So they fulfilled his request and they buried him there. So Sultan Muhammad, who is considered the conqueror of this city, for 1100 years nobody had the courage, nobody had any power to conquer the city. But 1100 years later, Sultan Muhammad, who was the 8th Sultan or 8th leader of Ottoman Empire, he made attempts and he became successful because he was a very pious person and also a very smart person. He became the Khalifa, he became the Sultan when he was only 22 years old. His father's name was Sultan Murad. So Sultan Murad also made a lot of efforts in trying to conquer the city. So when he was about to die, he made a wasiyah to his son. He instructed his son that, my son, you should make every effort to conquer the city. So Sultan Muhammad, he listened to the words of his father, and then he made a strategy. He thought about all the things that the people before him had done in trying to conquer this city, but failed. So he tried to figure out why their efforts failed, why their campaigns failed. So then he tried to come up with solution. He tried to come up with a strategy through which he could win the war. So before he started the war with Constantinople, he sent a message to the ruler, to the king of Constantinople, and he said, if you surrender, we will not fight with you, and we will give you everything that you have. We will not take anything from you. You can just become one of the territories of our empire, and we will not do anything. But the emperor of Constantinople, he refused. He said, we will not give up, and we will fight until the last drop of our blood. So at that time, he decided that we have to go to war with these people. So he prepared an army of 250,000 people. So there were 250,000 soldiers that went with Sultan Muhammad. And first, they tried to build 2 castles on the sides. So basically, the problem that he figured out, the problem was that every time someone would come to attack Constantinople, they would call for help, and the help would come from Europe. So the help was coming from this path, Bosphorus. So Bosphorus was connecting and taking all to Black Sea, and through Black Sea all the help would come. So the first thing he did, he tried to block that help. So Sultan Muhammad, so what he did, he built 2 castles on the narrow side of Bosphorus. So there was one castle on this side, another castle on this side, and on those castles he mounted those attackers. So anything that would try to cross through this water, it would come under attack by the forces of Sultan Muhammad. So they had to get permission. Otherwise, they would not be able to enter. So he secured this side. Then he tried to find ways to enter from this side. He had army on all 3 sides, and he tried to enter from the other side. Finally, he did find a way, and he did make a strategy, and he entered the city from that side. And when he entered the city, there was a fierce war, because people inside the city, they fought tirelessly to protect their land, to protect their city, and so many of them died during that war. Finally, even the victory war would take 51 days. So the war lasted for 51 days, even with Sultan Muhammad, after all that thorough planning. Finally, when they conquered the city, they entered into Istanbul. And when they entered into Istanbul, that emir, that emperor was still over there. And at that time, they again gave him a chance. They said, if you surrender now, we will spare your life, and we will not do anything to you. We will set you free. So he said, I will fight until the last drop of my blood. So he did fight. And he died in that battle. After he died, they had conquered, they put their flag on the city walls, and they conquered Istanbul. And this was the first time that any person from outside had the courage to conquer Byzantine or conquer the city of Istanbul. And by conquering Istanbul, this sent a very powerful message to all other empires, the Roman Empire, and also the Mughal Empire in Indian subcontinent and others, that the Ottomans are very strong. So Ottomans, they were welcomed by others as well. They received welcome messages from others, and many other territories were also included into this territory. So Sultan Muhammad is considered the conqueror of Istanbul. So once he conquered the city, he entered, and there was the central place of Christianity, which was called Hagia Sophia. Hagia Sophia was like the Vatican of that time for the Christians living in Constantinople. So this Sultan, basically when he went inside, there was no Christian left there. So he washed the place and he cleared all the idols of any other person or any other rulers. He cleaned the place, he washed it, and then he offered salah over there, and he made it into a masjid. So since that time, it was considered officially a masjid. And people used to perform 5 daily prayers in there. Until Mustafa Kemal came into power, when he became the first president of this modern Turkey, when he became the first president, he declared that this place, since it is a historic place, he said this is not for masjid use anymore, and it will turn into a museum. So he turned the masjid, which became a masjid after the conquest of Sultan Muhammad, he turned that into a museum. And even today, it is considered the museum. So when you go to Turkey, you see a big name, which is Hagia Sophia Museum or Hagia Sophia Museum. And in that museum, now there is no salah, there's nothing. In that museum, now they have artifacts from the Ottoman Empire and other historical eras of this city and this country, but there is no masjid anymore. That masjid status has been taken away from this historic place, Hagia Sophia. So, this is the brief story of how this city was conquered. Now, in this city, this became the power seat for the Ottomans. So, Ottomans used to live here and they used to govern from here. So, the place where they used to live, they made a huge palace. It was not really a palace, it was more like a castle. But here I can give you a zoom in. This is the benefit of Google. Without going there, you can see it from here. So this is the palace where they used to live. See all this area? This is the palace. And this palace is called Topkapi Palace. So the Topkapi Palace is now a museum, officially. So when the new Turkey was founded, they took over this palace and they turned it into an official museum. So now all of this is a museum. It's not a palace anymore, it's not a castle anymore. All of this is just a museum, and visitors go every day in thousands, and they go and visit this historic palace or this historic castle. Now, this was, since this was the living place, the residence of the kings and sultans at that time. So many sultans, many future sultans were born here as well. Sultan Ahmad was born here. Sultan Muhammad II, Sultan Mahmud, and so many others, they were born here. So there was another sultan whose name was Sultan Salim. He basically, when he became the sultan, he conquered some other places as well, and he was considered the Khalifa at that time. So he became the Khalifa. When he became the Khalifa, he was given some tabarrukat, some relics, Islamic relics that came from either Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam or other righteous people like the Sahaba or other prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he started collecting those relics, those tabarrukat. And whenever he would collect some tabarrukat, he would bring them and place them here in this museum. And he had designated a room for these tabarrukat. So he would bring all those tabarrukat wherever he would find them and put them in that room. And I read, some historians have written this, that he had so much reverence for these tabarrukat that he was placing in that room, in this palace, that he would not allow anyone else to clean the room. He himself, even though he was the sultan, he was the king, he himself would sweep the room with his own hands. This is how much reverence he had for these tabarrukat, because the things that were in that room, they were attributed to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were attributed to Sahaba, and they were attributed to righteous people, and they were attributed to other prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, without any delay, I'll just take you to some of those things that I saw over there in that museum that are the Islamic relics. And I would suggest that, you know, everyone, if you have time, if you have the ability, inshallah, you should go, because these things are very rare in the world. And they connect us in one way to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Sahaba and other prophets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These pictures are not very good. I just found them on Google, but I bought a book from there, from the museum. So when you go in there, they don't allow you to take any pictures. They don't allow you to make movies. They don't allow you to do anything of any sort of recording. But for some special print booksellers or something like that, sometime maybe once a year or once maybe in 10 years, they give some special permission. So one bookseller was given special permission by the government. So he went inside and he took some very high resolution pictures. So those pictures were published in that book. The book is very expensive. I purchased it from there and I have it at home. Inshallah, sometime later I can show you those high resolution pictures. But here you can see some of those pictures, some of the tabarrukat that I saw in that part of the museum. That part of the museum is called the Privy Chamber, and also it is called the Chamber of the Holy Mantle. And I'll explain why it is called the Chamber of the Holy Mantle. So here you can see the stick of Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. This is the same stick, the same rod that Musa alayhi salatu wasalam used to carry with him everywhere he went. This is the same staff. This is the same stick that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked Musa alayhi salam, وَمَا تِلْكَ بِيَمِينِكَ يَا Musa, what is in your right hand, O Musa? So Musa alayhi salatu wasalam said, قَالَ هِيَ عَصَايَ, O Allah, this is my stick. أَتَوَكَّوْ عَلَيْهَا, I lean on it sometime. وَأَهُشُّ بِهَا عَلَى غَنَمِي, and I push my cattle with this, and I use this for these kind of purposes. And then this is also the same stick that Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, by the order of Allah, when he put it on the ground, it turned into a serpent. It turned into a huge snake, which was swallowing the palace of Fir'aun and everything that was created by the sorcerers at that time. This is also the same stick when Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, by the order of Allah, when he hit the ocean with the same stick, the ocean spread into paths. It turned into 12 paths. And this is also the same stick when Musa alayhi salatu wasalam, he hit the rock with it. The rock broke and water came out of it. So this is the same rock. I saw it over there with my own eyes. You can't see it very clearly, but I saw it, alhamdulillah, with my own eyes. And you can still see the freshness. Even though this branch or this stick is more than 4,000 years old. Easily more than 4,000 years old. But you can still see the freshness of it. When you see it with your own eyes, you see that it is fresh, very fresh. and it is ordinary. This picture is the picture of the sword of Dawood alayhi salam. So Dawood alayhi salam, although he came long after Musa alayhi salam, but still the time distance between us and Dawood alayhi salam is in thousands of years. So Dawood alayhi salam was known for his bravery, he was known for his expertise, for his skillfulness in using the sword. And this is the sword that belonged to Dawood alayhi salatu wasalam. Somehow it continued to come down to Muslims, and it came down to these sultans, and they brought it into museums. So Dawood alayhi salam is also the person whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given the power to bend the iron. I call him the iron bender. There's no real such thing as iron bender except Dawood alayhi salam. So Dawood alayhi salam, when he used to take iron in his hand, he could easily bend it, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would soften the iron in his hands. Allah said about him, وَأَلَنَّا لَهُ الْحَدِيدِ. We softened the iron for him. So no matter how thick the iron was, when Dawood alayhi salam would touch it, it would become very soft, and he would bend it the way he wanted to. So he used to make armors and sell it. Now this is, it says, the place of a piece of cloth belonging to Sayyidina Hussein radiyallahu anh or Sayyidina Hassan radiyallahu anh. This is a shirt, and this shirt belongs to Sayyidina Hussein radiyallahu anh, the grandson of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Simple shirt. This cloak belongs to Fatima radiyallahu anha, the beloved daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is a box, and this is a small bottle, and in this bottle there is some soil from the grave of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the original letter written by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which was sent to some king. So this letter was retrieved. You can see the signs of aging. You can see some spots over there. But this is the original letter written by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with his own hands. This is a turban that belongs to Yusuf alayhi salam. And Yusuf alayhi salam was the great grandson of Ibrahim alayhi salam. So it goes close to the time of Ibrahim alayhi salam, which makes it about 45 to 5,000 years old. This imama is about 5,000 years old. And you can see it in how good condition it has been preserved. Now, when you're seeing this, this is not probably how it was tied by Yusuf alayhi salam on his head. When they found it, they probably, in order to make it shorter, they tied it like this. This is a small box which belonged to Sayyidah Fatima radiyallahu anha. It is not made out of gold. She did not have any gold. She lived a very modest life. She did not own gold or silver. It is probably made out of wood or something like that. This is also a box kind of thing, and in there is a hair from the beard of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it says the hair from the beard of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it is white, and you can see it here. See the arrow? It's pointing towards the blessed hair of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I was reading online on Wikipedia. Whoever wrote this, I don't know how to change it, but I know you can change that. Whoever wrote that part about this hair of the beard of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, na'udhu billah, he said that after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam died, the barber, na'udhu billah, he shaved the beard of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then they distributed the hair, which is totally wrong. Nobody ever shaved the beard of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam still has his beard while he's in his grave. This hair came off from his beard as hairs fall. Normally, when you're making wudu or when you are scratching, the hair fall. So this hair fell from the beard of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and a sahabi picked it up and he preserved it. And then it was passed on to the next generation and next generation until it came to this generation, and then it was preserved into the museum. This is the picture of a key of the Kaaba. In old times, this is how the key of the Kaaba used to be. It is made out of silver, and it is the actual key that used to open the lock of the door of Kaaba. This is also an original of the letter that was written by Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but this is a different letter written to a different king. This is a footmark of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, somehow miraculously, he stepped on a rock and it absorbed the marking of the feet of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is very similar to the rock that is called Maqam Ibrahim. So if you go to Kaaba, if you go to Masjid al-Haram, there is a place called Maqam Ibrahim. And in there is a rock which has the marking of the feet of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And similar to that, this has the marking of the feet of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And it is the right foot. This is a bowl, and this bowl belongs to Ibrahim alayhi salam. So this was the last thing. And there are over 600 things in that chamber of the museum which are considered tabarrukat. And among those 600 things, there are the swords of Abu Bakr radiyallahu anh, sword of Umar radiyallahu anh, sword of Uthman radiyallahu anh, sword of Ali radiyallahu anh. Also, there are teeth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was fighting in the battle of Uhud, he lost some teeth. So those teeth were not thrown away, they were not destroyed, they were preserved, and until from one generation to another generation, until they came to this museum. So those blessed teeth of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam are also preserved. Then there is also a mantle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the shawl. So this is why it's called the chamber of the holy mantle, because once Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gave a shawl to one sahabi. His name was Ka'b bin Zuhair. So Ka'b bin Zuhair respected and loved that shawl so much that he preserved it. So when he passed away, his children, when they inherited that shawl, they sold that shawl to Muawiyah radiyallahu anh, who was the Amirul Mu'mineen at that time. So Muawiyah radiyallahu anh and his family, which ruled for next few decades, the Umayyi family, the Umayyi dynasty, so they had that same mantle, that same shawl of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they also kept it preserved. So when the reign moved from the Umayyi dynasty to Abbasis took that from the Umayyis. And when Abbasis lost power, the Mamluks, they came into power in Cairo, in Egypt. So they took over that same mantle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So from there, when Ottomans came into power, Uthmanis, when they came into power, they took the same mantle from them. It was Sultan Salim who took that, and they brought it to Topkapi Palace. They brought it to this museum in Istanbul. And since that time, for the last 600 years, it has been sitting in that same palace. So sometime what they used to do, the sultans, the kings, they used to soak this mantle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam into water, and then they would drink that water, because that water would become the blessed water. The last thing that I just want to share with you is the grave of Sayyidina Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh, the great companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, same sahabi who hosted Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam the first time when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam arrived into Medina after his migration. He was the first person whose house was chosen by Allah for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam to stay as a guest for 1 month. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam stayed in his house for 1 month as a guest, and this was the honor that was given to Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh. So Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh, he traveled all the way from Medina, and he came all the way to Istanbul. He fought in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Finally, he became sick and he died. Before he died, he made a wasiyah. He said, when I have died, take my body as close to the wall of the enemy as possible and then bury me there. So they took his body all the way towards the wall of Istanbul, and they buried him over there. I'll show you his grave as well, inshallah. But on the map, I'll show you this. where his grave is. So they brought his grave over. This is Fathiyya Mosque, and there's Sultan Ayyub Masjid. So they brought it to the Masjid of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh, which was made later. In Turkish, masjid is called jami, but they spell it as Camii. But it is pronounced as jami. So the masjid of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh is somewhere over here. It's somewhere on the yeah, this is where it is. Ayyub Baldiya. Yeah, right here. So this is where Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh is buried, and there's a masjid now, and the Sultan, he made that masjid. So basically when Sultan Muhammad, he conquered the city, he asked one of the scholars, one of the saintly scholars, he said, can you please guide me where the grave of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh is? So he led the Sultan to the grave of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh. And when they found the grave of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh, they secured the area and they built the masjid around it, and they made that the holy place in Istanbul. So in Istanbul, the most sacred place is the place where Sayyidina Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh, the companion of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is buried. So I went to the grave of Sayyidina Abu Ayyub al-Ansari radiyallahu anh, and it was considered the place where they used to crown the new king. So when the new sultan would be crowned, they would not really put a crown on him, but they would go to this masjid, and there he would offer some salah, and after the salah they would take the sword of Uthman radiyallahu anh, and that would be considered the crowning of the new king. So lastly, I just want to show you some pictures that I took, that I was allowed to take. So this is a picture of the Blue Mosque, as you know. The real name of this masjid is Sultan Ahmad Masjid. It's not Blue Mosque. It's famously known as Blue Mosque, but in reality, this is Sultan Ahmad Masjid. This masjid is 396 years old. It was opened in 1616, and now it's 2012. So 4 years short of 400 years. Very old masjid. But in Istanbul, there are masajid that are more than 1,000 years old. But this is the inside of Sultan Ahmad Masjid. This is the courtyard. And Sultan, when he used to come to the masjid, because the Topkapi Palace was nearby, so his horse would come inside, and he would get off his horse over here, and then he would enter the masjid. But it is a big masjid, and the roof is all made of domes. There's nothing like this. It's all domes. This is the inside, the domes inside of the masjid. A very beautiful dome. And it is one of the most beautiful masajid in the world. All the Turkish masajid, especially these historic ones, Suleymaniya Masjid and Sultan Ayyub Masjid and Sultan Ahmad Masjid and the new masjid, they're all very beautiful. The Turkish architecture, architecture of masajid is one of the unique ones, and is very beautiful. This is also the inside of the masjid. So in those masajid, in almost all the Turkish masajid, since they have very high ceilings, they have the domes. So they don't put lights on the dome. What they do, from the domes, they hang wires and they hold these chandeliers kind of things. See, these are the lights, and they're like this high. You can actually touch these lights, but they're hanging all the way from the dome. So long ropes are holding these bulbs, and these bulbs are attached to a ring, and then they light up the masjid through this way. So there are many masajid in Istanbul. If I say maybe a few thousand, I might be wrong. There are so many masajid. On every street you may find one masjid on one side, another masjid on another side. The sad part is that the masajid are basically deserted, abandoned. So few, very few people attend the regular prayers in masajid. Even for Salatul Jumu'ah, I was sad to see that the masajid were not full. Even though 85% of people living in Istanbul, living in Turkey, are all Muslims. But this is something that makes me sad. But inshallah, when people are attaching themselves to the masjid, people are learning more about Quran, learning more about Islam, and there is a hope, inshallah, that maybe the next generation will take this country back into that history of Islamic flourishing, and where Islam and the knowledge of Islam and the practice of Islam was symbolic and was flourishing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq to practice wa sunnah wa Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Ameen wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. اللهم صل وسلم على عبدك ورسولك. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد أفضل صلواتك بعدد معلوماتك. اللهم إنا نسألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى. اللهم إنا نسألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في الدين والدنيا والآخرة. اللهم حبب إلينا الإيمان وزينه في قلوبنا وكره إلينا الكفر والفسوق والعصيان واجعلنا من الراشدين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. وصلى الله تعالى على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. When this Byzantine rule collapsed with the victory of Sultan Muhammad of Istanbul, that was the last time that that this place was ever ruled by Christians, and the person who was ruling it used to be called Caesar. So the Caesar of East was this person who used to rule Byzantine here in this place. So in one hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had said, إِذَا هَلَكَ قَيْصَرْ فَلَا قَيْصَرَ بَعْدَهُ, that when Caesar has finished, there will be no more Caesar after that. When Caesar is gone, there will be no more Caesar after that. And this became so true with the conquest of Istanbul at the hands of Sultan Muhammad, that was the end. And inshallah, it will remain the end. There will never be the rule of any Caesar, any Caesar over Istanbul, over Constantinople anymore until the day of judgment. Because the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam are the truest of all. Jazakumullah. I think the dinner is ready, inshallah.